Okay, folks, in our last video, we were talking about some of our major and minor intervals. So some intervals can be major and minor, and some of them cannot ever be major and minor. And these are the perfect intervals. They're just perfect. But we do have some perfect intervals, and those are going to be, because I bet you've been wondering, okay, well, we've covered seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths. What about the fourths, fifths, octaves, and unisons? Those are the ones that are perfect, except when they're not. But most of the time, they're going to be perfect. So when we have a perfect unison, it just means that we have either the same note being sounded at the same time, like E and E together. It's really hard for me to write those on top of each other, so that's what it is. Or you can write them melodically and say, hey, there they are. Great, two separate notes. We would look at two pitches like that and we would label that P1 as a perfect unison. We might see those every once in a while. We typically don't end up having to label them all that much. So let's focus on the fourths, the fifths, and the octaves. So when we're creating when we're labeling, rather, a fourth or a fifth, let's pick one here. Let's pick F. Right now we don't have a key signature. If we did, our fourth would be here. But once again, we have to count up 1, 2, 3, 4. We are 4 pitches apart. Now, if I were to base an F major scale on F, starting on F, I'm going to need a B flat. That, when we see it, is going to be a perfect fourth. So if we see the fourth as it would exist in the major scale built off of that bottom pitch, it's going to be perfect. That's going to be the same thing for fifths. So if I have an F, again, I'm going to go up to C, F, G, A, B, C. That's 5 pitches apart. And without doing anything, making it sharp, flat, any of the other stuff, just as it comes, garden variety, fourth or fifth, it's going to be perfect. So if it is just like it is in the major scale, we're going to call them perfect fourths, perfect fifths. Same thing with an octave. So if we have F to F, we're just going to call that a perfect octave. It's exactly what it is. So again, these are our perfect intervals. Perfect octaves, unisons, fifths, and fourths. They can never be, never are major or minor. You're never going to have a minor unison. You're never going to have a minor octave, a minor fifth, a minor fourth. Those are not going to happen. Now, what happens when we do alter the fourth or the fifth? We've talked about tritones before in class and been like, ooh, spooky. That's the devil's interval. And they said that was a bad thing, right? And we've talked about the tritone being either a raised fourth or a lowered fifth. So let's take our F, and if we want to raise the fourth, we don't have to put this natural sign here, but just for the sake of demonstration, we're going to do that. In our F major scale, we would normally have B flat. So we're raising the fourth up by a half step. When we do that, it is no longer perfect. False. We have augmented it. So you might see it written as augmented fourth. You might see it written as A4. You might see it little a4. You might see 4 with a plus before it. You might see it as 4 with a plus after it. All of those are going to tell you, hey, this is an augmented fourth. And that's one of our tritones. Now we can alternatively have a diminished fourth, meaning that we're going to take something away from what we see normally. So let's start with F again, and let's just, a regular perfect fourth is going to be F, G, A, B flat. Well, how do I diminish that flat? Well, I add a double flat. I'm making the interval smaller. I am diminishing the interval. So now I have a diminished fourth. We can have that same thing with fifths, with octaves, and with unisons. So let's do an augmented fifth. Let's keep it based off of F. So our normal garden variety perfect fifth is going to be F to C. Now, if we want to make it augmented, we're going to make that interval a little bigger by raising up the top by a half step. Now we have an augmented fifth. And if we want to diminish that interval, make it a little bit smaller, we're going to lower that top interval by a half step. So now we have a diminished fifth. And you might be thinking to yourself, wait, hold on. These are the same thing. Lady, what are you trying to tell us? An augmented fourth and a diminished fifth are the same thing? They're going to sound the same. They're going to sound exactly the same because these are enharmonic pitches. Your C flat and your B natural are going to occupy the same key on the piano, but we would have to categorize them as different. We cannot cheat and pretend that this is a fifth when the way that it's written, it is only written as a fourth. This is technically, it could be written this way, but it's not. We've written it F to C flat, which means it's a diminished fifth and not an augmented fourth. They're going to sound the same, but you have to label them different, right? It's like the name Jeff and the name Jeff. Jeff and Jeff, right? You say them the same, they don't sound the same, but they look different, and we have to call them different things. Jeff is going to be really upset if you don't spell his name right. Spell Jeff's name right. So call an augmented fourth an augmented fourth, and call a diminished fifth a diminished fifth. So we can also have Jeff and Jeff. Sorry, let's do a diminished octave. So we have F to F. Normally, that's what we would get. That's our perfect octave. But now let's make it a diminished octave. What we need to do then is make it F flat to give us a diminished octave. And if we want to make an augmented octave, we want to do F to F sharp. That's our augmented octave. Same thing if we want a augmented unison. We have E to E sharp, E to E flat. That's going to be our augmented unison, and that is going to be our diminished unison. Okay, so these are some of the ones that can be our perfect intervals, and what happens when we expand them by a half step, or we diminish them, augment them by a half step, or diminish them by a half step.